Hi. Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. So, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
I think we have one person yet to join in. Great. So, my name is Anu Rains. I'm the founder of Sustainable Investment Partners, a registered investment advisor based in Massachusetts. So, today, the topic of our panel is the color and gender of money. However, before we start, please keep in mind that this is not a conversation about money as a product. It's about money as a distribution system. Because no matter how good the idea of money is, if the distribution is not designed for the people who need it, and if it's optimized for a select set of people, access will collapse. So, in this panel, we have 5 people who sit at 5 access points in the money ecosystem. We have someone from technology, credit, finance, and finally, workspace equity. So, regardless of the domain, we'll keep asking the same question in different forms, which is who gets access and why do they get access? And we'll start off with panel introductions. But before we start, I just wanted to express my gratitude to GatherVerse for providing us this platform and giving us the opportunity to share our voices. So we'll kickstart the introductions. So Mike is our automation specialist. Mike, would you like to start off? Mike, I think you might be muted.
So my name is Mike Dixon. I work for Wellington Street Consulting, and I do consulting that's very focused on the human side of technology and center on automation, usability, and have spent a large portion of my career helping organizations to make complex digital tools more intuitive and inclusive for the people who use them.
Thanks, Mike. Next, we'll go to Priya.
Hey guys, I'm Priya Menon, founder of Good American Lands. In my business, I acquire and sell vacant land across all the different states in the United States. In the process, generating cash and also providing people with purchase power for buying land. And I do that through seller financing. So that in a nutshell is what I do. Thanks, Anu, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Priya. Sara, you go next.
Good afternoon. I'm Sara Ryerson. I'm a loan officer with MBA Mortgage in Massachusetts. I'm also a landlord. Primarily, I work with getting first-time home buyers into the property ownership space. I also work with investors too, first-time investors, experienced investors. Pretty much covers it.
Thank you, Sara. Nargis? Nargis, you're on mute.
Hey, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Anu, for this opportunity. And actually, I come from a long career in product and technology. And over the years, the stock market has always fascinated me. And through the years, I got very much interested in it. And now I work in that space, basically analyzing and teaching people of what the market moves are through price cycles and price behavior, timing, and deeper rhythm that drives the market, basically. So I'm here to share that perspective with you all, and that's about it, basically. So learning through experience.
Great. Thank you, Nargis. Miriam.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Miriam Rubin. I'm co-founder and CEO of a consulting group called Listen to Your Mothers. We work with employers to help implement workplace policies and culture that create a competitive edge, not just for moms, but also for the employers themselves. And I'm excited to be here. Thanks so much.
Thanks, all. So let's maybe kick off the discussion with technology. And we'll go to an exciting space first, which is cryptocurrencies. So when cryptocurrencies first appeared, the narrative, it was pretty simple, permissionless by design. But then as the years went by, the use case that actually exploded was the store of value use case. So we are not going there today, but we'll go back to the original promise, a system that was built to create open, permissionless financial mobility. And here's the real question. Did we get what was promised, or did we get something that was totally different? And so that question takes us straight into automation. If the system was supposed to expand access, automation essentially determines who gets in through the gate. So, in that regard, Mike, as we push to automate financial systems and money flows, which decision points should never be automated? And from your background in systems integration, what warning signs would tell you if automation has gone too far?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one of the biggest lessons that I've taken away from my work in automation is that it's excellent at scale and consistency, but terrible at context and compassion. So before we automate, I ask my clients one question, which is, what is your core purpose rather, and what parts of work actually require human connection? The core purpose is the thing that defines who they are, and that should never be automated. So that's kind of one of our founding guidelines, is to never automate their core purpose, but instead to focus on the bureaucracy around that and the things that prevent them from being able to get to that core process. So or as we like to say, we like to automate the bureaucracy and not the humanity of it.
Got it. Thank you. So I guess in terms of the question about when does automation go too far, I guess if I could just think about what you just said, the moment humanity disappears, that's the point at which automation has gone too far. Would that be a reasonable way to think about it?
Yeah, I think that's one of them. So visibility, I think, is an important part of it. So invisible decisions is something that we try to avoid. We also want to make sure that there's always an option for a human override. So lack of human override is another thing to be avoided. And then, the last one would be the loss of purpose.
Got it. Okay, great. So going to cryptocurrencies, when you think about permissionless, or when I think about permissionless or decentralized systems, there's such a heavy burden on users, from setting up the wallets to managing private keys to navigating protocols and so on. So I guess my one question would be, this complexity, is it itself a form of gatekeeping in a way? And what does it actually take to make money and digital assets truly accessible to the people who are currently left out?
I would say that it's an unintentional form of gatekeeping. It definitely wasn't there on purpose, but because it does exist, it is in fact its own form of gatekeeping. I would love to see things like crypto wallets just develop more and have a little bit more streamlined process for transferring funds from one currency to another, for example, or moving things from a staked state to a payable state. These are the types of things that take a pretty high level of knowledge for people to understand that I think your typical person isn't there yet. And we don't have a lot of tools available to us, like digital wallets that have a very user-friendly interface. A lot of the digital wallets out there are very bare bones, which is great, but they lack that kind of polish and accessibility to your typical uninitiated user.
Got it. Yeah. And in a way, this has led to the creation of a new financial global elite. Would you agree or disagree with that statement?
Yeah, I think so. I would agree with that.
Yeah, because when I think about it, like my aunts and uncles, for instance, no one uses cryptocurrencies. No one actually transacts using cryptocurrencies. And if you think about the global population, like what percent of the global population is online? So if you have to actually go back to the whole notion of this is the permissionless entity that's going to kind of like get everyone on the system, I think we have ways to go. I hope we get there, but we have ways to go. Thanks, Mike. So we'll now move on from the digital gate to the financial gate. So we all know that credit, that's like one of the oldest choke points. If you control credit, you control who enters the wealth building cycle. So Sara, I'd love to go to you next. So the question really is, if like you are a loan officer and you are a landlord, what opened the door for you to go into investing and lending? And over the years, have people in your life, it could be clients or friends, have they followed your path because they trusted your example?
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of preface my experience. I grew up very, we grew up on government assistance, my family, so I didn't have that access to wealth. I didn't know that it was a possibility for me. I just started working when I was 16 and saved a lot of money and never knew what to do with it. I didn't have a family to teach me what to do with it. And then what opened the door was I actually had a friend who said, you have these savings, what are you doing to invest it? And I'm not doing anything with it. And he was very much into real estate, so he suggested buying a property. And then, it didn't take too much convincing beyond that. All I needed was someone to say, hey, you need to invest. This is what you can do to invest. And I did that. So that I feel like is what opened the door to where I am now, to me being a loan officer. As far as people following my experience, I think my experience gives me a way to connect with like first-time home buyers who are a little nervous. They think they're not capable, or maybe they are doing they don't think their credit's good enough. They don't think they have the income. They might not fully understand the investment. And it kind of gives me that perspective to talk with them and encourage them, but also encourage them in a way that's realistic and kind of adjust their expectations.
Got it. Okay. And if I'd love to know a little bit about your background as a landlord. So you own, correct me if I'm wrong, you own a multifamily property, and that was like your foray into wealth creation using real estate as a tool. Mm-hmm. What gave you, what gave you the inspiration to do that? Yes, you had a friend, but in terms of do you need to be handy? Like, what is it that gave you the confidence actually to go in and say, yes, this is a way that I can actually create wealth for myself, and yes, I can do this? Like, is there any story there?
Honestly, I had no idea the level of work that it would take. It was a lot of research before I took the leap. I thought, once I know landlord laws, I buy a decent house. That's going to be, all it will ever be. And it's funny because I would go to see houses and I would see these, I would have experienced realtors and the sellers who had multiple properties. They'd look at me and be like, "Oh, it's your first property. Good for you. Good luck." But yeah, I found that you really do need to be prepared for the worst. I had a flood in my home, and if I didn't do some of the work myself, it would have been significantly more expensive. So yeah, you have to be prepared to learn.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, real estate really is an incredible way to save wealth and to grow wealth, especially when you're a young and upcoming person. It's yeah, and it just ties you to the community and it helps bring structure to your life. So so thank you so much, Sarah. And yeah, and next we'll talk about land. So credit tells us who's allowed in. And if you think about it, land, it's one of the most ancient forms of wealth. Land was like, if you think about blockchain, land, in fact, was one of the original ledgers of who mattered, right? And it's always been gatekept by law, by culture, by emotion, by tradition, and on and on. So over to you, Priya. You have your own company, you deal in the land space. Can you broadly talk about your client base? Amongst your clients, what's the representation of women, maybe people of color, and what patterns or stories do you see at the transaction level?
Sure. Thanks, Anu, again for this opportunity. Now, I want you to think about, when we say the word real estate, after getting into land, I realized that when I say I'm in real estate, most people are thinking houses, right? So our minds naturally drift towards homes, mansions, commercial buildings, shopping malls, and all of that is real estate. But land is actually like an invisible foundation, and majority of people actually overlook land. And you can also attribute it to our lives, because now our modern lives have drifted towards the more urban and suburban areas and away from rural areas. Hence, people really don't know or understand land. So it stands as a very niche and a very deep field. It remains heavily it actually does remain heavily male dominated, to be honest. In my experience, perhaps about 30% of the people who would be women. I deal with I'm primarily dealing online, so I can't really tell you about the people of color aspect of it, but definitely among real estate investors, about 30% of the people I encounter are women. But I will say, talking about stories, what I find is that these women investors are they are pretty compelling in the way they operate, because there is a deep sense of creativity and they're very savvy, because they are leaning into their superpower, which is often undervalued, and that is the ability to build real and genuine trust, right? So in this business, like in a lot of businesses, everything relies on relationships, and this is where women truly shine, because they're not just looking for another deal, they're really looking to create long-term business relationships and connecting on a deeper level. And I'll just throw out a quick example here. I have a fellow female investor who had a former client, who was actually stuck in a non-performing investment. And so she essentially went out of her way to help him right this issue with the non-performing investment, like taking her time to actually make it a performing investment again. And that's the way that I've often seen women operate in this space, where they're really trying to focus on long-term relationships so that the same customers come back over and over again. And so you can say that I want to say that women are focused on relationships, on transaction, on more transformative operations rather than transactions. And it really works well in the world of land investment.
Got it. So that's quite insightful. So you spoke of a few gating factors and you spoke of creativity.
Yeah.
So, and you yourself are an investor. So, how do you see creativity and innovation change the story of women investors like yourself? Because, like you said, this is a space that's male dominated. It's a space that's been around for generations. So, there's a way of doing things. How do you, could you maybe talk a bit on the creativity part of it?
Yeah, you can actually dive into this and you could spend hours and hours on this, but I'll try and focus on just the creativity aspect of it. So, just like I said, that women are really focused on, a lot of the women that I see, they're focused on building trust and building community. There is another secret weapon that women bring into any business, right? And that is intuition. So, in my experience, women are very intuitive and rely on these intuitions when making decisions. So, as you might know, I was formerly a product manager in a tech company, and part of my job was to study data and metrics. But another part of it was actually to speak to users. And speaking to users allowed me to tune my gut instinct. And that is really a big differentiator because that intuition comes from speaking and listening to people, understanding where people are coming from, what they want. When you've listened to these people, you can actually step back from the noise and step back from what everyone else is doing, and you can tune into those creative solutions. So I kind of attribute that to just speaking to people, building that community, building the trust, and hence building out that intuition. And when you do that, the dots sort of connect themselves. You could look at a piece of land and you could say, I know exactly what kind of person would buy these 100 acres of property, or I know whose dream it is to build an off-grid winter cabin, and I know how to make it possible for them with seller financing. Right, financing, again, like you said, is a gating aspect, and with land, we are able to make it possible for people to have that property ownership. So you can almost say that land is like a blank canvas. And once you've listened to people, once you've kind of honed in on that intuition, you can imagine and create solutions which would not be cookie cutter. And that's what I would say.
Got it. Great. We'll be back to you, Priya. Thank you so much for now. And so land, in a way, it tells us our past, right? And then there's the part of money that feels fast and volatile, which is stocks. So Nargis, over to you. And the question is, so your world is quite transactional. It can be quite fast. How do you, and like you mentioned in your introduction, you shifted careers, right?
Yes.
How do you see your client base? Do you see a gap between genders when it comes to trading decisions? Because what you do is education. And when it comes to real interactions, like what does that look like?
So yes, I do see diversity. Basically, there are more men than women in this field. And as other people has already talked, like Mike had talked, Priya had talked, Sara had talked, this is mostly coming from a place of who that person is, basically. For example, the way the society had been designed, women were never introduced to how finance works, or rather not involved in the decision making of the finances of the home. It starts from all of there. So like what Sara had pointed out, when she bought a home, she was not prepared. Okay, all of these things could be included. So that lack of knowledge is there, but lack of ability is not there. So considering that the stock market is mostly considered as a man's space, so it's very easy for them to be the hunter. For example, they were always the breadwinner, so for them it's a fast fingers. They would go and execute and they are prepared in their head, okay, this is the risk. I can be out here, I could be out there. I've booked in my profit, this is my investment, I've booked my loss. So now that lack of being in the space for women, that's where the challenge comes. It's not the lack of ability, but the lack of understanding, because we women don't just jump into things like Priya said, right? We are mostly thought driven gender, let's say, if I can put it in words. We have to know what's going on, how it is going on, what does it mean. So that brings in intention. So there's a deeper intention to things versus, okay, let's get into the space. And if you had seen the ads of stock market where people try to sell you the services, what do you see? You will see a guy sitting with a fancy watch in front of a swimming pool and behind is a big villa, or there is a private plane. They're sitting in a private plane. So the thought is, you know what, this field is so enticing, I would go there and come out walking with a private jet. But reality is not that. It's like any other profession. You learn, you understand, and then you make an educated risk. Basically, that's where your psychology comes in. A big input into that. Most of us, be a man or a woman, we definitely have our own fears, especially when you're directly dealing with money. Now, if you can train your psychology to risk management versus jumping into getting profits, there's a whole lot of difference it brings in. Then after that, it doesn't matter if it is a man or woman, color or not color. You are driving from the risk perspective. This is my portfolio, this is how I want to execute, and these are my risk points. It doesn't matter where the world is going. Remember, the stock market was there even before we were born, and it will be there after we are gone. The question is, will your pocket be there? Right? So if your pocket is not there, you are out of the game right there and then. So trading psychology matters a lot, discipline matters a lot, and the only difference which I have experienced between men and women is the intention. Women come with a lot of intention, they do take their time, and once they understand the game, they are a better longer term investors, what I've realized. And men are, they'll go and they'll make their big mullahs and they'll be very very happy, and they'll go and buy a big car, the gadgets. They're the gadget people, and they're not afraid to show it. Women are afraid to show their success. We are afraid to ask questions, we are afraid to be out there. Me coming into this space, it was a very tough time for me as well to break the ice, to go into the group. And once slowly I understood, and when I started talking the language, I started talking about my numbers, my cycles, and what difference it makes, people understood. Then one person, I remember, there used to be spaces on Twitter, when the macro, after the COVID,
Yep.
the men, the way they would talk, they would bash each other on spaces, like live stream. And I used to say, my god, is this how they talk? Should I learn some bad language in order to be there, like some curse word? I really wanted to learn some curse words. Then one day one guy commented, and when I was talking, there used to be silence, and I'm thinking, my god, they don't understand me, nobody's reacting, nobody's saying anything. Then one day one guy, he interrupted and said, Nargis, I'm giving you the title of queen today. And I was like, what happened? He said, we men, we talk so much and we fight so much, but whenever you come and talk, there is absolute silence because people are listening and taking notes. That day, it changed my perspective. That knowledge is true power, your content is true power. You can go with a jazz and take a picture behind a big villa and everything, but nothing beats the knowledge. Nothing beats how you are giving that knowledge. Having knowledge is one thing, giving that knowledge, teaching that psychology, teaching that discipline takes you a long way, and it has built a place of respect for myself. And I'm truly thankful for people coming out and giving me that feedback. One lady, she had come in, she had a Boeing position, and she had sold some covered calls, and unfortunately her stock was in underwater, and Boeing had jumped up a lot, and her position was definitely underwater. The covered calls were also underwater. So she was like, Nargis, I've seen you talking a lot. What do you think? What can happen here? So then I taught her actually how options worked. And if there are ways to defend your position, the biggest is, what was your risk and did you define it? And where did you think you would cut off the cord? You first answer that question before even you are going into the market. But apart from that, I taught her some strategies. I taught her how options work. I taught her how, to look at the movement of the stocks, what are the different levels she can watch for, and then make an educated guess if she wants to take a loss or wait for the stock to, come to that position. Few days later, she called, Nargis, that your education really helped me. And instead of taking a loss, I am today profitable. And thanks to you. And, after that, we started getting talking. She took some training from me and all that. And one fine day, she's saying, Nargis, I'll not be able to come next few days because my grandkids are coming. And I was like, what the hell, grandkids? I never thought you were. She said, no, Nargis, I'm 70 plus. And that day, it humbled me. So you see a lot of flavor in the market. So I have some teenagers come in and they come in with such guts so that they own the world. And we people don't have any knowledge or information. That's your teenage world. And then there are people like, that lady who is, 70-year-old and doing all this. So there's a whole landscape out there. The only thing is, what are we making of it?
Yeah. Wow, Nargis, that was amazing.
Thank you.
So, when you, women in learning, women in trading and, financial spaces, you mentioned that, when there's obviously when you go in, there's the upside, and then there's the risk that you're taking when you put capital to work. And if you define your risk ahead of time, that gives you some kind of an idea of, okay, this is when I need to step out, because at the end of the day, the markets can be irrational a lot longer than you can remain solvent, right? So you need to have capital every single time. That's the main premise. So what differences do you observe? Like, if you could, like, in terms of women, how do the women you deal with, how do they engage and how do they approach during the early stages? And before you say that, I'll just make it clear that all the panelists are talking about their individual experiences. So everything we say, we are not saying that it's statistically significant. It's a subset of our experiences that we are bringing together. Yeah. So with that, Nargis, if you could, yeah.
Yes. So I have had quite a few interactions with women, let's say it that way. And a lot of them were, the women were coming out of a place of fear. So a few interactions which I had, I'll give some examples, is, some women were recently divorced. Okay. And now they are single or head of the family. And that whole thought of, oh my God, how am I going to manage my finances? It becomes a very, very big issue. And then they have kids also. And, whatever arrangement they may have, now they're thinking that I am solely responsible for myself or for my kids or both. And that's where I was seeing a rushed intention to, jump into the ocean. And that's where one lady had come, I remember. She had lost a lot of money. She had bought a lot of tools from the market because, as I was saying, the advertisement is so powerful out there that people, get emotional about, okay, what, this is the what do you call that, the cup, the holy grail. This is the holy grail and I am going to be a millionaire after that. That thought process have put a lot of people behind, specifically women, basically, because number one, you were, as a society, you were not given the tools to enter into this space. Secondly, now you are in a societal pressure of looking after yourself. So the first thing I told her was, no matter what tool you buy, if you didn't have your process, no tool in the world is going to work, right? So if she had bought 5, 6 tools worth $10,000. Okay. And I was like, did you actually use them for a certain amount of time? Right? That person had developed, even though he had made it for, marketing himself, but it should be working at least 5%, 10%, 20%. Did you dive deep enough to let it work a little bit based on your, whatever understanding you had of that? So that's where I was seeing the lack. There's a lot of intention to enter, but we women generally think, how can I be in the room without entering the room?
Hmm.
So that makes it a little bit tougher. And
Okay.
that's where, yeah, and that's where, for example, uh, that those few examples which I had was coming out of fear, coming from a place of fear. But then there are other places where I had seen even men also. One young guy had come and said, Nargis, I had lost so much money and now I'm in credit card debt, because he had taken loan against his credit card and now he was suffering. And I was like, this has nothing to do with stock market or any kind of financial instrument. This is exactly to do with your emotional being
Yeah.
and where you are setting a limit for yourself.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So net, if you think about it, women, and again, not statistically significant, but based on your experience, there's a lot of preparation. And like you said, understanding, you need to be open to knowing that going in, you can have a loss, understanding the downside risk and being okay to book the risk, book the
Yes.
loss. And
Yes.
then moving on would be kind of like, one big thing for you.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Booking the loss is very, very important, because your 5%, let's say you had a stop loss at 3%, that 3% of my portfolio, I'm okay to bet on it.
Yes.
The moment it goes down, then did you have a plan? Are you honoring it? One
Got
of the things which happens a lot is, once the stock is moving up, that euphoria builds in. So
Got
your
it.
profit target was, say, I would take a profit at 20%, 50%. But then when you see it's going green and green and green, you forget about that profit target.
Okay.
And then you're like, okay, can we go to the moon?
Mhm.
Then that moon comes down to earth.
Yeah. So, Nargis, so you have talked about stocks making money, losing money. And before we move on, I just want to name something that's simple but often ignored, which is any conversation of investing works if earnings exist in the first place. And those earnings, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Mostly they are shaped by workplaces and by policies and the systems that determine who rise and who stalls, right? So, with that in mind, let's shift from the architecture of money, the distribution of money, to the people inside it. So, I'd love to come to you, Miriam. So, from your vantage point inside organizations, what's the biggest gap between a woman's ability to create economic value and the structures that determine whether she actually can capture that value?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. I would start by just kind of outlining like a founding principle, which is, in order for for a workplace to have really solid policies that are closing gaps, two things need to be true, right? You need to have good policies that are going to help close those gaps and are naming that within the policy, but you also need to have the culture that supports it. And what we see often is, yeah, sure, there are some companies that we see that don't have either good policies or culture. But what we most see, and I'll say in a second that this can perhaps sometimes be even more detrimental, is we see companies that have good policies don't have good culture to support them, or have the strong culture and don't have policies to support them. And as I said before, that can often be more detrimental than companies that don't have either, because it creates this appearance that things are going well and that they have a policy in place that is working, but it's not actually implemented effectively. And so just two examples on that. So a company, I think pay transparency is a really good example for there's been a big push, and I live in Massachusetts. There's actually a law in place now about pay transparency for employers. And so there's some solid policies there. There's been a lot of push to like create policies that have salary bands that are transparent to everybody and processes around compensation review and things like that. However, I've had experiences working with organizations where they have those in place, but they don't have the culture to support, which means that there might be a process on paper. It makes the company look really good in theory because they're like, okay, great, we have an equitable pay policy. And then in practice, there's exceptions that are being made. And the people who make the exceptions and ask for exceptions are historically people in bigger positions, more positions of power, usually not women, not people of color. And so in some ways, it creates this harm where, people can point to, oh, we have this equitable policy, and in the background, it's not what's happening. So that's the example there. On the culture with no policy, we see this a lot with flexible work. And I raise flexible work as an example because right now, you might have seen in the news that there's statistics out there that mothers in particular are dropping out of the workforce at higher rates than they have in the last 40 years. And a lot of it is due to return to work policies. And the thing we see here, and so that's why I think of it as, something that's really perpetuating this gap in economic opportunity. And what we see here is that, a manager, flexible work can really depend on who the manager is. So if there isn't like a policy written, maybe you have a manager who's great, who says, do whatever you need to do, go pick up your kids, whatever, and then your manager leaves. Or somebody else is doing the same job but has a different manager, and it's a totally different thing. And so it leaves a lot of room for inequities to occur. And so as hard as it is to actually document flexible work in a policy, which people are often hesitant to do because in nature, it's just hard to put on paper what that means. It's really critical to have both. And then I guess I would just highlight one example that really puts it into perspective. So I worked with a woman who had a second kid, went out on leave. She was in a high position, a leadership role. She went out on leave, came back from leave, and decided, after trying to work with her employer on some concessions, decided that she needed to leave because it just wasn't sustainable to be in the role that she had and have two kids. At the same time, there was a man who was in a very similar role to her, also had a second kid. And what happened to him? Somebody you might be able to guess, but he actually got promoted. And so that's another example where there was the same leave policy available to both the man and the woman. The woman took it. He decided not to take it. And there was there was the culture piece where after the woman left, people said, oh, well, that's just what happens. And after the man had a kid, they said, oh, great, it's time for you to be promoted. So I think it's a good example of where all things need to be at play.
Got it. Okay. And it's kind of interesting when you talk about, policies of working from home, because right now online and the huge debate is folks have forgotten what it means to be back in the office. And it's one of the things where flexible work really has benefited a lot of women, because women and men, because you save on the commute time, you save on a lot of things, but we are where we are, and we need to find a path forward. So I guess, Miriam, in your work with leadership teams, what policies strongly influence whether women step towards financial opportunity, or they just decide, what, I'm good where I am, let me just stay away from this?
Yeah, I mean, going back to flexible work, that's a huge one. We did a survey a few years ago of working mothers, and 88% said flexibility was more important than anything else: pay, promotion, opportunities, anything. And we're seeing that again with this policy. I would say just to note, flexible work doesn't always mean remote work. there's many ways to be flexible, including scheduling, making schedules more consistent. And so I think really, like, sometimes it's a cop out to say, well, we can't do remote work, but I would bet millions of dollars that like every industry can find some way to be more flexible than they're currently being. And so I think that's a really important piece, because the number of women who have told me like they're not going to take a promotion, even though they've been approached and asked for one, because their workplace knows that they would do a good job, because they're worried about flexibility, it's staggering. And then that's not just a detrimental impact to women, that's a detrimental impact to everybody in the employer included. So I think that's one thing. I think the other few things are more about like career growth and like being transparent about opportunities. So even in the example I gave of the man and woman who had the second kid at the same time, transparency about opportunities for promotion, right? I think there's this assumption built in that the woman wouldn't want the promotion, right? Because nobody talked to her about that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an assumption built in that he did. So I think we can't assume just because of where people are in life, they want one thing or another. And we have to be able, if somebody's doing good work, we have to make sure that we're presenting opportunities to everybody. Also, if there are good people in your workplace, you want to keep them and you want to make sure that they want to be promoted. And so investing in career growth and in good people and making sure that you're talking to them about, like, if you're saying, oh, there's this position we have open, and a woman is saying, my daycare schedule is hard for me to work these hours, you're asking, well, how can we make this work for you? Because we want you here. So I think that's another really important thing. And with that, just like the shift in mindset that this isn't, we're not talking about just that this is good for moms. This is like, employers lose out when they don't do these things. And then the last thing is, I think, and we see this both in like sectors and also in jobs specifically. Women are often asked to do labor that they're not compensated for in the name of like professional development and growth, and men are compensated for the same opportunities, right? So when and this happens, you know, even if you compare education to tech, so in the sectors, but also just in positions, there's kind of this sell, like, oh, take this on and this will help you grow. And it's really critical that people be compensated for the additional work that they're being asked to do.
Well, thank you, Maria. Really thoughtful insights. And especially from your vantage point, since you do consulting outside the organization, you essentially have a vantage point into organizations as you work with them on how they function. So I guess one question to everyone, actually the same question, and I'll just go with you, Miriam, since you spoke last. So in your area, if you were to think of just one structural shift that would create the most immediate access, what would it be if you had to just pick one?
I have 10, but I will narrow it down to one. And just going with this topic of like, this is not just a women's issue. This is not just like a parent issue. This is an employer, this is an everybody issue. And it benefits everybody to take action. I think one tangible thing that can demonstrate that is more people taking parental leave that are not birthing parents. So encouraging a culture and a policies that allow for fathers to take parental leave, and thereby like trickling down, not just like from the beginning, equitable distribution of care for children. And that is something that can be long lasting throughout everybody's lives.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Maria. Mike. One shift.
Me.
Yes.
I would say if there was, so same question, right?
Yep.
If there was one policy shift, what would it be? I think this is less of, well, no, it is strictly policy. To monitor employees or gauge employee success based on their productivity or their work output instead of the time that they put in. So moving away from a punch clock. And this speaks really strongly to what Miriam was just talking about. There's more than one way to be flexible. Like there's so many people that are like night owls, like myself. Like I feel more productive after 8 p.m. at night, you know? So I have a tendency to block out work sessions during that time. And that works well for me. That's not going to work for everybody, but that level of flexibility, I think, would be very beneficial to people.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And thank you so much for answering the policy question. So I guess I'll go to you, Sara, next, and I'll just rephrase the question. What's the one structural shift that would create access for the people who are left out in your space? So your space would be, loan creation.
I think the biggest issue beyond more access to loan products that suit unique situations, that's a big one too, but they do exist. Outside of that is loan officers and brokerages that aren't willing to work with clients long term. People crop up a lot. They don't have the greatest credit history, especially the women I work with. I've dealt with a lot of women that, their focus was on other things, raising their children, their families, things like that. They didn't have the experience. They didn't really understand the impact of, low credit scores and missed payments and things like that. And I think they get turned away by a lot of people who just aren't willing to work with them long term and then put in the effort to help. So I think a stronger inclination to help others and work with people would be massive.
Thank you, Sara. Priya.
Thanks, Anu. It's been wonderful to hear all the insights. And I wanted to add, when we talk about Mindshift, to continue with what Miriam and Sara and Mike just spoke, a lot of people really feel tied down by their jobs and like there is no way out of the grind. So if I were to talk about a mind shift, I would think that it really comes down to marketing wealth. People need to know that wealth is not glitz and glamour. Wealth is not something that allows you to buy. Wealth is something that allows you to create, right? What is the value that you can create? People need to approach wealth with the thought that it is something that they can invite into their lives. And for, that would, I think, be the major mind shift, that it is something that they can make possible. I mean, just to quote a really small example really fast, think of the Enchanted Kettle and how the Coca-Cola company came into being. If you haven't heard of the Enchanted Kettle, please go look it up. It's a wonderful story. So I think that's what I would say. Like, marketing of wealth is the most important mind shift.
Great. Thank you, Priya. Nargis?
Hey, Anu. The one thing which I would say is, make financial education more accessible, right? We go to school, we learn the math, but nobody tells us how that math can be applied to.
Mm-hmm.
For example, during my journey of learning about the stock market and teaching, I used Fibonacci series, right? And it's a very, very famous series. This is taught in middle school, actually, but nobody told us where to use it. Right? If somebody had told me, Nargis, this could be used in the stock market, I would be a billionaire sitting here today and maybe not talking to you. Right? So these are the things, and now the landscape has changed. We have AI, we have the bots. Today, Elon Musk announced that the judicial system can be replaced by a robotic judge, giving out decisions in a wink. If that is going to happen, then imagine how the financial world is going to change. We need to be ready for that, whether we like it or not. Earlier, we were sending letters, writing letter, going to the post office, putting on a stamp and sending. Then we have the smartphone.
Yeah.
The next revolution is about AI and everything else. So are we prepared for that?
Mm-hmm.
Even today, my husband has been telling me, use ChatGPT, ask him the question, this and that. And I was still very reluctant to do that because I am someone who lives in my head. I rely on my head more than anything else. So relying on asking ChatGPT for certain thing, it would be like, I don't want to, degrade my mind, right? For example, what if I get dementia if I do, you start using, so we need to get out of that thought process and actually use the things, get in the space of what's changing today. And I think there's immense wealth amongst us in the world available for us to grab. I would say that.
Got it. No, thank you, Nargis. And I think we are up on our time. So before we sign off, I just wanted to say thank you all for the clarity and the truth that you brought to this panel. And, everything starts with a thought, right? And conversations like this, it essentially recalibrates what's possible for our systems, especially like you mentioned, Nargis, like, it's a time of great change for us with AI coming into the scene. And we need to understand what's possible for our systems and what's possible for the people inside them. And I just wanted to say thanks to our audience as well. Thank you for showing up, and thank you for listening deeply. Take care, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you, Anu, and thanks, GatherVerse, for this opportunity. It was nice meeting all of you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.